Welcome to Dose of Social, your recipe for social media success. I'm Lindsay Mauk,
I'm Kayla Pearlstein.
and this is
Dose of
Social.
Social.
All right, so today is our first ever remote episode that we are filming. We are super excited to have our guest, Krissy Manzano, co-founder of Blueprint Expansion. Thanks for joining us today, Krissy.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
Yeah, and Krissy and I actually met through a local Nashville networking group for women business owners called Brain Trust. We were put into the same group, and so we've learned a lot from each other. You'll also hear throughout our episode that Krissy has this really calming tone of voice, so she's really great to listen to and learn from. So we're very excited to have you here.
Well, I love that. I hope I can meet the expectations you've just set through this episode.
So, Krissy, can you start by sharing your journey in co-founding Blueprint Expansion and how your experience has shaped your approach to recruiting for marketing roles?
Yeah, so this is what was a very interesting story. I never wanted to own my own business, let alone own a recruiting firm. I actually despised recruiters, if I'm being completely honest. And I know that seems harsh, but I just thought, you all suck at recruiting. Why would I would never want to do that? And here I am, right? 5 years later, owning a recruiting firm. So joke's on me. But I was a sales leader at, SaaS tech startups in different industries my whole career before that. Started as an individual contributor and then, worked my way into leadership roles and was doing really, really well. And I think every move that I've made in my career, most people have been like, why would you do that? You're about to be here, or you're already here. Like it almost didn't make sense to a lot of folks. And so I've really always tried to stay true to making moves that made sense for me, that I felt were strategic and would make me happy. And it's always just worked out so well. And so that's kind of, how I ended up running my own business, or starting my own business and co-founding it with Chuck Brotman. I worked at a company called Keep Truckin'. Now it's called Motive. And it's, in the logistics trucking space. Name is probably gives that away. And so I started an office in Nashville. They were a small San Francisco startup, and we ended up growing it from myself to over 100 people in a year. We went from, when I started, I think they were at like 500,000 in revenue, and we grew that to 60 million in 1 year. So it's this crazy ride. I ended up, basically getting to be a GM of an office, which is almost like running my own company. And so it really gave me a taste of entrepreneurship. And I thought, wow, look what I'm able to do when I'm so empowered. And I really, kind of get to make a lot of the decisions. What could I do if I got to make all the decisions? And if I didn't have any reins on me? And so that was one of the reasons that I started Blueprint. And we kind of wanted to replicate what we had done at Keep Truckin', but help other companies do that by coming and expanding into the Southeast. We started in January of 2020, so it's not a great time to start a business right during the pandemic. And so that original vision just really didn't have legs and fell. And we kind of got into recruiting accidentally for one client. The one client we signed in 2020 was, we went to go move forward. And he's like, I don't want that. I just want recruiting help. And we're like, well, we're not recruiters. But then it was like, well, we've made no money, so we need to try this. And so we did that and realized, hey, not managing a North American sales team and versus just recruiting is actually a lot easier. And it really kind of brought me back to, I love helping people kind of, find purpose in their careers and match people with the right companies and looking at skills and behaviors. And so that's kind of my long-winded story of how I got into recruiting. But I also, too, had just had my, first child, my little girl, and I was seeing a lot of people look at me and going, you've peaked. Now that you're a mom, you're not going to be able to hustle in the same way, or you're going to be without saying it, a bad mom, right? You're going to have to choose. And I just found it, I found a lot of things about the limitations people put on women so ridiculous. And I was like, you know what? I want to go start my own company and show I can have work-life balance, not run myself into debt and be crazy stressed, and show up in all the ways that I want to be. No one's going to tell me how I can show up. And so that was another really important part of my story and my journey. And I think what running a recruiting firm and how I look at marketing roles is different is I was always on the sales side. So I worked with marketing, of course. They were a partner of mine, but and I would be a part of, a peer interview or something of that nature. But I now really get to understand marketing in a totally new way where I realize how specialized it is. And I actually wrote this post on LinkedIn about just kind of as a lifelong sales leader apologizing to marketers because I'm like, I get it now. I get why we butt heads in orgs, right? And where the disconnect can come from. And so it's really helped me understand that, function more intimately and how to look at success in a way that is realistic, right? And that comes from hiring, but also setting the right goals.
Yeah, there's always that natural tension between marketing and sales, right? So that
Totally.
well, that's amazing. Thank you so much for sharing that with our audience. Can you tell us what SaaS means for those listening who do not know that particular acronym?
Yeah, no, for sure. So software as a service, ChatGPT, even though it's AI, right? That's a SaaS platform. So you can access it on your phone or on the internet with a login, essentially, right? But typically, what really defines SaaS is if you're measuring things in ARR or MRR, so annual recurring revenue or monthly recurring revenue, right? So you have a subscription and it renews every month or every year, whatever that looks like, right? That is what SaaS is and why it's so powerful outside of just being able to access it online. So that the pricing is very indicative of if it's SaaS or not, or the structure of it, I should say.
Awesome. Thank you. So, when it comes to hiring for social media specific roles, and I know that social media has evolved a lot in the last 10 to 15
Mhm.
years. I mean, back when I started doing this, there wasn't such thing as a social media manager. It was a new media
Right.
manager. Like there's now growth marketers. There's lots of different terms. So, what are some key factors that small businesses should consider when they're determining whether or not they need to hire a social media manager or if they should be looking at a broader marketing role?
Yeah. So I think the first thing is understand what your problem is. We all know when things aren't right, but sometimes as business owners and leaders, what I see is people go, I'm just going to go hire someone to fix it. Right. And I have no idea what the problem is, let alone how to fix it. So I'm just going to expect someone else to do that. Right. And so you can have a multitude of reasons of why that's not successful. You hire someone that's not going to fix the ultimate problem. They can do a great job in what they're doing, or you're just not aligned in what that problem is. Right. So I think the first thing is before you decide to go hire, you have to be what I call ready to hire. Do you understand your problem? What are the outcomes you want to achieve from getting that? If you're wanting lead gen and all of this stuff, you all can tell me if you disagree, on this. I would say, I don't know, you know, if hiring a social media manager solely is probably what you want to do for that. Not that social media managers can't help with some of those things, but it's not the main purpose of social media, right? And I think sometimes people confuse that, especially when we hear about influencers, right? Well, there are social media managers and they're getting all these brand deals and making all this money and or thinking, the more people that see us, this is a new way of marketing. So that's how we're going to get lead gen. And it's just so much more complex than that. There, you can obviously get elements of that. So I think really understanding what are the outcomes you want to achieve, right? And making sure that the role that you hire for is going to have the skills needed to achieve those outcomes. I think a lot of founders, whether they've been in sales or not, a lot of them are very technical or specialized in their craft, but you have to kind of have an element of sales to be a founder. So because you don't have a sales team at the beginning, so you've got to pitch yourself. Sales is hard, but it's a different level of complexity than marketing, which is much more specialized to your point, right? And so, if I want to go and hire to drive sales, I know I need to hire an account executive or maybe a leader, a former leader that's going to be an individual contributor role. Of course, there are things I have to determine on who's the right fit for that, but it's a little bit simpler in identifying the structure and the roles. For marketing, there are marketing generalists, but that might be a good place to start, but you really need to understand like what's the specialty here that I'm trying to achieve from marketing. And I think, I would really want to understand that before I would move forward and understand what you want the social media to impact. And again, if it's lead gen, I would advise that's not the role to hire for. It would be another specialty, in my opinion.
Oh, and I think Kayla would definitely agree with you on this opinion based on conversations that we've had about lead gen and
Sure.
social media performance.
I was
Yeah,
literally gonna say thank you for pointing that out because a lot of people don't understand the difference, and so to hear you say that made me feel good.
Yeah.
yeah. And I think also, like, determining if you have the time to train this person
Yep.
and teach them about your business and what your goals are, because I think sometimes brands, especially small businesses, they might say, "Well, I need this person to do this, this, and this," and then they don't have time to onboard them or don't have time to train them
Yep.
properly, and then it's not effective for anyone.
Yeah. To that point, people use being a small business or a startup as an excuse for not being organized and honestly being lazy for how they're going to bring on new folks. If you are hiring at all, that needs to be your priority. One of your priorities is getting them trained and onboarded. I don't care how much experience they have. It's funny. I have worked with literally seed stage companies, so ones that are they've just determined a product market fit to Fortune 50. I am not kidding you when I say every single one of them, every single one describes themselves as a startup. Well, I know we're a really large company. I have a massive IPO company. They're like, but we're in a large company, but our section is like a startup within a startup. Everyone considers themselves a startup. So it's funny to me how folks don't want to hire people from large orgs. And I understand that to some extent, but everyone has this view of how hard it is. They're facing the same problems in a lot of ways, right? And so I just say that because you to your point, Lindsay, you have to be ready to hire and prioritize because you can't use excuse like I'm a small business, so that's why I cannot do something that's critical, right? Just because of your situation, doesn't take away from something that's like a mission critical responsibility, which is helping that person get up to speed. That's like a non-negotiable in my
Yeah.
opinion. And if you don't or aren't willing to prioritize it, then don't hire.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a great point.
Yeah, right on. I agree. You have to be ready to invest the time in that
Yep.
hire. And one thing that I heard from someone many years ago that's always stuck with me is hire slow and fire fast. So
Yeah.
making sure that you also take the time to find the right candidate for that particular role. And
100%.
if it's not working, identifying that quickly rather than spending more time trying to make something work that might not actually be the right fit.
Yes. I would say though, hire slow is in you don't need to hire a ton of people throughout the year. But when you are ready to hire, don't keep those candidates in the loop too long. Like it shouldn't take you 6 months to make a hire because then you're just analysis paralysis and you're wasting time. But I
Yeah.
agree with the concept,
And I don't
right?
think that sends the right message to the candidate either. Like,
No.
"Oh, we strung you along for 6 months because we can't get our shit together."
Yeah.
Just
100%. 100%.
Um, yeah, I agree. So, what strategies do you recommend for small businesses to attract the right qualified candidates for these specific social media or broader marketing roles?
So you need to start with what we call building the ideal candidate profile. And if anyone kind of wonders what that looks like and what that means, we have a free resource on our website that we've created at blueprintexpansion.com. You have to put it, it is gated, so you have to put in your information, but we're not going to spam you, so don't worry. We're small, so we're actually behind in following up with people like we should.
Are you a startup?
Oh yeah, we're a small business, see, but at least I can admit where we fall short. But what I see a lot of people do is they go straight to the job description. And in that job description, let's be honest about what happens. You go, okay, I know I need to hire a social media manager. Let me see what other people are putting on LinkedIn or other places for social media. What are they hiring for? Okay, these people look like they're kind of in my field, kind of similar. Okay, what are they asking for? Let me just take this. This is going to be my template, right? You tell yourself it's your template. And then what ends up happening is you go and you edit it for you. Here's my, what's exciting about our company. Here's some qualifications. But what you end up doing is you end up keeping pieces of qualifications and information that you have no data on to support if that actually is what you need. And we talk about like, why do the same people keep applying? Because our job descriptions are keeping everyone in the same funnel because everyone's copying their job descriptions and they're making tweaks, but not enough to, it's like, well, you know what? They want 3 years. I guess I should have 3 years too, right? Or at least I need to have two. And we literally just make stuff up. So starting with ideal candidate profile is so great because it focuses on skills and behaviors. I talked about this at a panel discussion, but the Harvard Business Journal came out with an article with some research from, I want to say it was like the University of Florida or something. And they had studied thousands and thousands of individuals in roles, including leadership and individual contributors. And they found that 95% of all individuals that were successful had everything to do with their skills and behaviors and nothing to do with their industry experience or experience background, which I found fascinating, right? 95%. And so that's why this ideal candidate profile is so important because you want to look at what are the key skills and behaviors I need for someone to be successful in this role. They need to be detail oriented. They need to be able to be a great project manager. They need to, know how data driven, right? And really how to analyze that and make strategic plans. I'm not saying you can't have an element of experience in there, right? But driving it from there. I want someone that, embraces challenges versus is focused on protecting themselves anytime a challenge occurs. All types of things. And ChatGPT is a great way to organize this. It used to take a long time to build out competencies. You can work with ChatGPT. It's an incredible tool to say, I'm trying to get down to, I would say no more than 5 competencies. And then you list out, is this remote? Hey, what's our pitch to a candidate of what's exciting for them? So that whole template and that whole exercise gets you really grounded and I think helps it become less overwhelming because this is where you're doing the hard work. If you do this stuff on the front end, the interviewing is easy. It's actually a lot more because you just feel a lot more confident. So it helps you identify, hey, this is my interview process and what that will look like. And then after that, you can go to a job description. And I always say build out your qualifications and skills based on what you just created in your ICP. That way you're not as prone to go and copy what someone else did. And now you kind of have this bias or unconsciously that you're like, well, no, they should have 5 years. Well, if you don't have data to support that, be careful, right? And know that that's going to deter away 100% of women because women do not apply if they don't meet 100% of the criteria. So keep it short and sweet. Because your goal is not to stop people who you don't think are qualified from applying. Those people, even if you say only Jesus Christ himself can apply for this role, they will still apply for that role. You will not stop the bad people from applying. So just a couple of things of how to prep for that. And then you go out and, of course, build your interview process and align it with the competencies.
And I will say, as a small business owner, I actually went through that process with Krissy when I was trying to hire a project manager. And so she kind of had me take that step back from the job description and we talked through everything. And then I was able to build out what I was looking for. And ironically, I ran into somebody when I was in LA filming with Lindsay. And she is now on with us as a part-time project manager, but definitely makes that process easier.
Before we dive back in, let's give a quick shout out to our incredible Season 2 sponsor, the Sapphire Suite.
Are you looking for a space that inspires creativity, fosters connection, and supports you in growing your business? Located in the heart of Franklin and Cool Springs, Tennessee, the Sapphire Suite is a co-working space designed exclusively for entrepreneurs and business owners. Whether you need a stylish spot to host meeting, a quiet corner to focus, or a supportive community of diverse thinkers who will challenge and support you, this is the place to be. Subscribe to our newsletter and receive a free day pass to experience our amazing community of business owners for yourself.
This episode of Dose of Social was brought to you by the Sapphire Suite. Thank you so much to the Sapphire Suite for sponsoring Season 2 of Dose of Social. Krissy, could you suggest some effective interview questions, speaking of going into the interview process, to evaluate a candidate's expertise in social media management?
Yeah, I would want to understand a couple of things, right? So what platforms are you familiar with using? And again, you want to align these to competencies. So you don't just want to put these into one interview. You want to make sure you're interviewing for, which interview is interviewing which competencies. So there's not a bunch of overlap, but fully assessing the person. Tell me about a time that you used data in order to get X result for someone, right? Whether they wanted to, increase their followers or their brand image. And, walk me through a project that you were on. What was the outcome, or what was your specific responsibility or goal that was set? Or, I say quota. Social media managers don't have quota per se, but something of that nature. And then what was the outcome of that? I always like to hear people be able to clearly define what their responsibilities were and what they attained from those responsibilities, right? I also like to hear, tell me about a time where you messed up, right? Because I want to hear someone walk through accountability, not blaming it on anyone else. What was their learning? Because one of the most important things is, can someone implement their learnings, whether they did a great job or a poor job, right? So those are a few things that I would ask. But the number one thing that I would say is, and I think a lot of people miss this, and this would be for candidates and companies, I want to know if they know my company, right? This is the one thing I will say about marketing. Sales, you can't be in sales if the whole thing about it is you are trained to have to intimately understand what a company does, your prospect, right? Because that's how you're going to sell to them. You have to know that. And so what I found, even in recruiting, but also in marketing, there's a lot of, answer these 4 questions, or, tell me this. There's not really a diving into what a company does and understanding it. And so if someone doesn't understand what you do, if they cannot go and pitch what you do to someone else, and I'm not saying they need to be an expert in the interview process, but digging in deeply, then why would you hire them to manage your brand and attract your audience if they don't intimately understand what you do? It's wild. It's the same with recruiting. Why would I go hire an agency to go find the right people for my company when they just know the one-liner on my website? Well, they're in data privacy, and they're a SaaS company, and they're fast growing and have a great culture. That's not knowing a company, right? What is their pitch? Your job should be able to know their value prop and the problem they're solving. And you come to that first interview and you have secondary questions. And so if I don't see that with candidates that I interview for marketing, whatever, I know they are not going to pass my clients. That's what companies want. And that's what business owners and small businesses should be looking at intensely, because that's where the biggest disconnect is. People going, you have a great culture. What you do is great. I love, let's say you're a skincare company. I love skincare. That's why I want to work here. Okay, that's great. I don't really need you to be passionate. I just need, that's wonderful if you are. I need you to know what I do and show that you came here prepared and you have secondary questions. And ChatGPT is a great way to figure this out as a starting point. And I'm telling you, if people don't step up to that, you are going to drown in a sea of candidates for trying to find folks. So companies, you should have people want to know, why do you want to work here, should be your question. And if it's culture or what, unless it's a really entry-level role, that would be a big red flag for me. But I always open up explaining what our company does to see if they're listening too, right? Here's what we do, what's exciting. And if they miss that, on to the next.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's just great advice for anyone looking for any type of role, is do your homework on the company that you're interviewing for. Make sure you're looking at their website, understanding their business, what they do, what problems they solve, what some recent news they had or press, what are they doing on social media. I would say, especially if you're someone who's interviewing for a social media position, look at their social media platforms and see what they've been posting, what types of content, how often they're posting, what are they posting in their stories, and come to your interview prepared to have shown that, one, show that you've done your homework, and two, show that you understand their business and their goals, and then three, show that you have a clear idea of how you can help them going forward.
Yeah. 100%. And one thing you can do if you're worried about interviewing, like wasting time interviewing, we have what's called pre-screen questions. So anyone that wants to set up an interview with us, we're like, that's great. We loved your resume. Can you answer these 3 questions for us? And we'll let them set up an interview at the same time. And if we see they're not aligned, we'll cancel it. But it's like, can you confirm this pay works? Why do you want to work here? And, maybe one other thing, right? You can tell so much, right? Is someone just being passive and they don't really care and they're like, well, I don't know, or they don't ever respond. But you can also see, like, how do they write, right? How responsive are they? Is there, do they communicate well? It's a great way before you get something really committed on calendar.
Yeah, and I think the vetting process is important because you don't want to, as a recruiting manager, you don't want to waste your client's time interviewing the wrong candidates either, right? So those
Yeah,
pre-screen
100%.
questions could totally help. So going into those pre-screen questions too, Krissy, I know we talked about how skills are more important than necessarily having industry experience, but in regards to social media, how important is it to have experience with specific social media platforms or specific social media tools? And how do your clients factor that into their hiring decision for social media managers?
I think it depends, again, going back to like, what are the outcomes, right? Um, what, for example, our social media platforms are LinkedIn is our number one, and then we have YouTube, right? We're going to be getting into Instagram, more to come there. So that's exciting. But there are so many social media managers that would not be qualified for us because they are Instagram and TikTok, right? And there's nothing wrong with that. There's a need for that. But our business is on LinkedIn. Our clients are on LinkedIn, a lot of the people we interact with, and that's where a huge portion of our social media is. Not to say it's not going to be in other areas. And so understanding what are the outcomes and where does your business live? And then, seeing, I also would want to assess like what's trainable and what's not, right? So, hey, I cannot train them how to view the dashboard analytics on Instagram. They have to have a basic understanding and at least a year of experience doing that, And so, again, it's not to say you have to do all the training for those things, but figure out what am I willing to train, what am I not, right? That's reasonable. And that can kind of help you figure out, okay, they've got to already have experience using one of these two platforms or both of these platforms. What type of reporting are you looking? So looking at some of the key job qualities and not qualifications even, but just the description of it and going, what are things that they need to be able to start organizing day one to figure out what someone should have. But I would say for skills, detail-oriented, data-driven, and inquisitive to learn, right? Are things that would just be, I think, non-starters for me at any level of role for social media.
Yeah, those are good ones. So in our last interview, you talked about the STAR method. And I can't remember what question we asked where you got into that, but it was really good, and I wanna make sure we capture that again.
Yeah. So this is advice I give candidates interviewing. An interview is like 30 minutes to an hour max. It's not long. And so what I see a lot of candidates try to do is just word vomit everything about them. Because, like, I want you to make sure you know how great I am and what I can do. And what they end up doing is never answering the question or just being super long-winded, kind of like I am now, and going through the questions. And so the STAR method stands for situation, time, action, result. So when you're asked a question primarily about examples, right? Tell me about a time where you had a difficult client and you had to increase, their following over a period of months. How did you manage that? And what did that look like in the outcome, right? So you would go, okay, well, here was a situation. This was a time period of over 6 months. This took place. Here was the action I took to kind of address this. And these are the steps I went through. And then here are the results I got. And so it's a great way to be able to tell that story in an organized fashion that isn't long-winded. It's concise, but it has enough detail. And here's the beauty about it. It's hard, but if people want more detail from you, they'll ask. They're not going to go, they didn't give enough detail. Now, they will stop asking if after one or two, after 2 or 3 times, you don't give any detail. But they definitely will continue, right? And the number one thing that candidates don't do is answer questions directly. They go off script to be like, this is what I want you to know about me and what I want to say, not I heard what you were saying. Here's my answer to your question.
Yeah, I think that's such a great thing to think about when you're answering questions, even for like a podcast interview, is like, okay, let's talk about the situation,
Yeah,
then the
right.
timeline, the action
Yeah.
I took, and then
Yes.
ta-da! The
Yep.
result. So yeah, I think that's great. Yeah, no, that's a really helpful method. And I know I've heard you say that before, and I thought it was really some great advice. It's something that I personally haven't heard of before. So I think that for those listening, I hopefully you can take the STAR method and work it into your potential future interview questions or answers as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely.
So, Krissy, what final advice would you give to small business owners who are looking to strengthen their efforts through effective hiring?
So you've got it, as Lindsay said, you have to be committed to put the time in. You need to have a process, a very organized process. A process is not, I'm the first interview, Kayla's the second, Lindsay's the third. That's not a process. Those are details, one of many that are part of the process, but that's not a process. You need to build that ideal candidate profile, have a job description that's short and sweet, and then create a process that's aligned around your competencies. Every interview, if you go into an interview and you're trying to assess someone as a whole, you will continue to fail. And you will continue to gravitate toward biases that are unconscious and conscious. And you will continue to hire the wrong people or wonder, why was this person good? Why was this person bad? Because you weren't focused on the right things. So, when you identify those skills, those competencies, same thing. Interview 1 can be assessing for one of those. Interview 2 is for 2 of those. And then maybe there's overlap somewhere, right? But understanding everyone's role and what role they play in assessing a competency. And then remembering, when you move someone on to the next step, it's not what I hire them. It's, do they have this competency, right? Well enough for me to move them on to the next step. I also think having an exercise at the end, even for junior level roles, is just incredible because it really shows you what someone can do, right? Whether it's a mock scenario or, hey, here's instructions to a presentation we want you to create, right? You get to really see what someone is made of and what they're going to go through. And I also really look at, and again, write down, you're like, what's trainable, right? Well, they didn't put together, like, the presentation could have been a little bit more beautiful, but we're not having them do that. And the content was incredible. And that's what we care about. I'm just making stuff up, right? So that is what a great process looks like. And I'll tell you, even though I do this for a living, anytime I go to hire, I get nervous, right? Like, I'm hiring a salesperson soon. And so I'll get nervous and go, we've got to make sure they work, right? And then I remind myself, like, this is what you do for a living. This is how you create a process. And what I will tell you is, if you go through these steps, the hard work is up front. When you go through the interview process, you will be amazed at how much more confident. So when you get someone hired, you're not going, gosh, what if they don't work out? We're screwed. You're going, I feel really confident about them. And if they don't work out, I'm going to be able to pinpoint why and change it in my process to hire really quickly. But ultimately, I've just lowered the risk of this not working out significantly, right? And so, and look, if you were like, I just don't have time to do all that, then hire an agency, right? Hire an agency that's specific to your niche, right? If someone tried to hire us for engineering roles, we'd be like, we'll refer you to somebody. That's not our specialty. Our specialty is marketing, sales, and customer success. I really think recruiting is changing in that way. And so making the wrong hire or being late on a hire costs so much money. People don't even realize how much they're losing out on. So it's worth it to invest in some help, or to make sure you invest in the time up front to get it right and be disciplined with it, and know that just because you're doing it the right way doesn't mean it's going to feel comfortable. But that's because, we're pushing ourselves outside of a lot of social norms and cultural biases to get past that make it difficult to kind of go through those steps, but it works every time. I guarantee it.
That was great advice
Awesome.
to
Yeah,
end on.
thank you. Well, Krissy, this was so amazing. Thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us today and give us some insight into what companies are looking for when they're hiring social media managers, and also what small businesses should be considering and candidates should consider throughout the interview process. If you are someone who is looking to make a career change in 2025 and beyond, or you're looking to hire in 2025 and beyond, we definitely recommend that you check this episode out with Krissy Manzano.
Yes.
Thanks so much for having me, you all. Pleasure as always.
All right. Thanks for listening to Dose of Social. We're out.
Bye.
Bye.